The stars were no longer silent. They whispered of war, of something vast and ancient stirring beyond the veil of light. Humanity had always believed itself small in the endless expanse, but that belief shattered the day the message came. It wasn't a transmission we discovered by accident. It was a warning. A pulse of coded energy, older than any known civilization, echoing through space and striking Earth like a heartbeat from the dark. Scientists first thought it was a cosmic anomaly, but when the signal repeated, rhythmic, deliberate, intelligent, everything changed. Humanity's long search for life beyond our world had finally ended, and the answer was far more terrifying than we ever imagined. The year was 2381. Earth was united under the Terran Accord, a fragile alliance born from centuries of conflict and near collapse. For decades, humans had stretched their reach to the stars, building colonies across nearby systems, mining asteroids and claiming planets as their own. But with growth came arrogance. The Terran Doctrine, our guiding philosophy, was clear. No human shall kneel before any power beyond humanity. It wasn't just a law, it was a belief carved deep into the soul of our species. We were no longer explorers. We were conquerors. Yet as the signal deepened, something in that belief began to crack. The first to interpret it were not soldiers or politicians, but linguists and code breakers. They called it the awakening sequence, a message, or perhaps a summoning. Across deep space, probes began to fail. Communication relays flickered with ghost signals. Something or someone was listening back. In the command chambers of Terra Prime, the leaders of the Accord argued behind closed doors. Should humanity respond? Should we send a message back into that darkness? The scientists warned restraint, the military demanded action, and somewhere in the middle stood the people, ordinary colonists, miners, farmers, watching the skies grow dimmer each night as stars disappeared one by one from the heavens. Then came the first disappearance. A fleet assigned to the Perseus frontier, 2,000 personnel, gone without a trace. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors. Just silence. The void had swallowed them whole. At first, the public was told it was a navigation failure, a solar flare, anything to keep panic under control. But deep within the Terran Defense Command, they knew the truth. The fleet had been taken, erased by an unknown force emerging from the outer dark. Admiral Coran was the first to act. A man shaped by endless wars, he was both respected and feared. To him, fear was weakness and the doctrine was sacred. He believed humanity's survival depended on dominance, not diplomacy. When others hesitated, he deployed the Vanguard, Earth's most powerful warships, into uncharted space. If the darkness comes, he said, we meet it with fire. But not everyone shared his conviction. Among the scientists of the Deep Space Research Division, a young analyst named Arlen uncovered something horrifying within the signal patterns. It wasn't just communication, it was a memory. Embedded within the frequencies were fragments of images, impressions of worlds consumed, civilizations turned to dust. The message wasn't a greeting. It was history, someone else's history. A record of extinction. Arlen tried to warn them, but by the time his report reached the Council, the Vanguard fleet had already vanished into the void. Days turned into weeks with no word, until a final broken transmission came through. The voice was barely human, distorted by static. They are awake. Do not respond. They remember us. Then nothing. The darkness had answered. That was when everything began to unravel. Across the colonies, power grids failed simultaneously. Artificial intelligences shut down, claiming to detect non-human interference. Orbital satellites pointed their sensors toward the edge of known space and saw it, a movement, vast and slow like a storm crawling across the stars. The data made no sense. The readings suggested an energy mass larger than a planet, yet alive, shifting, adapting. It wasn't a fleet. It was something older, something aware. Panic spread through the Accord. The doctrine that once gave humanity strength now became its cage. To admit fear was to admit weakness, and the leaders refused to break the illusion of control. They ordered silence across all communication networks. No public broadcasts. No mention of the awakening. Only the elite within Terra Prime knew the truth. Something was coming, and it was coming fast. Meanwhile, far from the polished towers of Earth, in the mining colony of Helion 4, life carried on with uneasy normalcy. The miners there had no idea of the signal or the missing fleets. They only knew their systems were glitching, their skies darker than usual, and strange echoes haunted their radios. A crew working the night shift reported hearing whispers through their comms, words not in any human language. Moments later, their equipment failed, and when a rescue team arrived, the mine was empty. By then, the scientists had decoded the full message. 3 simple words repeated endlessly through the static. The dark remembers. It wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. Humanity had disturbed something ancient, something that remembered the first sparks of civilization, long before our kind had learned to walk upright. The darkness had waited, patient and silent, and now it was awake again. Admiral Corrin refused to believe it. He dismissed the warnings, claiming the data was corrupted. "No ghost from the past can threaten humanity," he said. "We are the Doctrine. We are the light." But Arlen saw it differently. He knew the truth hidden within the frequencies. The message wasn't from strangers, it was from us. Or rather, from what we had once been. A long-forgotten chapter of human existence erased by time and arrogance. We had awakened our own past, and it was angry. Across Earth, strange phenomena began to appear. Electromagnetic storms, spontaneous power surges, and dreams that didn't belong to the dreamers. People across different worlds described the same vision, a shadow rising beyond the stars, its eyes burning like dying suns. Some called it prophecy, others called it madness. But one thing was certain. The darkness wasn't waiting at the edge anymore. It was moving closer. The Terran Council finally broke their silence. They declared a state of total planetary defense. The doctrine shifted from belief to survival strategy. Every ship, every soldier, every system prepared for war. But how do you fight something that exists beyond understanding? How do you battle a memory that refuses to die? In the final hours before the blackout, Arlen made one last transmission, a message broadcast across all frequencies. "This isn't invasion," he said, voice trembling. "This is judgment. We built our empire on ashes, and now the ashes have come to reclaim their own." The signal cut there, mid-breath, leaving the universe in suffocating silence. And then, on the edge of deep space, where the last Terran beacon flickered in the void, the stars began to go out, one by one, until only darkness remained. Humanity had spent centuries conquering the light. Now the light itself was being conquered, but somewhere, buried in the static, a faint human voice still whispered through the void. "We are not done yet." The darkness was awake, and humanity was about to remember why it feared the stars. In the aftermath of the blackout, silence wrapped around Earth like a shroud. The skies above the home world were darker than ever, even during the day. The sun's light seemed dimmer somehow, weaker, as if something vast had stretched between the stars and the planets, draining warmth from everything. Across the colonies, people whispered about the missing fleets, about the dark that had swallowed ships whole. No one dared to say it aloud, but the truth was spreading faster than any government could contain. Humanity was no longer alone in the void, and whatever had awakened wasn't coming in peace. Arlen's transmission still echoed across the hidden channels, replayed in secret by those who had heard it before the systems went dark. "This isn't invasion. This is judgment." Those words became a haunting reminder of what humanity might have brought upon itself. Many dismissed it as fear-mongering, but others, especially those stationed on the frontier worlds, felt it deep in their bones. They had seen the strange distortions on their scanners, heard the voices in static, and witnessed how the stars flickered as if gasping for breath. On Earth, life tried to continue under the illusion of order. The Terran Council broadcast calming statements promising stability and control. They claimed the darkness was a temporary phenomenon, a cosmic anomaly that would soon fade. But in the underground sectors of Terra Prime, where classified data flowed freely among technicians and analysts, the truth was becoming undeniable. Power grids weren't failing randomly, they were being drained. Something was feeding on the energy systems, learning, adapting, growing stronger with every blackout. Admiral Corran refused to retreat from his stance. To him, humanity's strength had always been rooted in defiance. He ordered new fleets to be built, stronger and faster than any before, using experimental reactors designed to channel gravitational energy. These ships would form the core of the Terran Vanguard II, an armada meant to reclaim the stars. "The Doctrine does not bend," he declared before the Council. "If the Dark remembers, then it will remember our strength." In orbit above Mars, the first of the new Vanguard ships came online. Massive, sleek, and armed with weapons capable of splitting moons, they represented everything humanity believed about its own invincibility. Crews lined up to serve, proud to defend the species that had conquered its own limits. But none of them knew that the ship's energy readings had begun to fluctuate. The gravitational cores inside them pulsed irregularly, as if synchronized with the same frequency of the original signal. The ships were resonating with the darkness. At the same time, on the far edge of explored space, a small outpost named Haven 9 detected something impossible. A planet-sized shadow moving without orbit, gliding through the void with deliberate direction. The technicians described it as a living eclipse, absorbing starlight wherever it passed. The outpost tried to send a warning to Terra Prime, but before the transmission could finish, every screen in the control room flickered. A voice, deep and mechanical yet strangely human, spoke a single sentence. "We remember the Terran flame." And then the outpost went silent. When the report finally reached Admiral Corran, he ordered the fleet to prepare for immediate engagement. He wanted to strike before fear spread any further, but not everyone agreed. Within the Council, voices rose against him, those who believed the answer lay not in war, but understanding. Among them was a strategist named Avon, who had once served under Corran. Avon argued that the Doctrine, once humanity's greatest strength, was now its blindfold. "If we define everything unknown as an enemy," he said, "then we make the darkness inevitable." But his words fell on deaf ears. The preparations for war continued. Across the system, billions of humans watched the Armada rise into orbit, their engines glowing like new suns. It was meant to be a moment of hope, but for many it felt like a funeral procession. Humanity was marching towards something it didn't understand. As the first fleet disappeared into deep space, the stars around Earth began to flicker again, slowly at first, then all at once. The night sky, once filled with light, now shimmered with movement. Astronomers noticed distortions spreading across constellations, as if the fabric of space itself was being rewritten. Every telescope turned outward saw the same thing. A shadow vast enough to swallow galaxies, moving closer with purpose. And somewhere in that endless dark, a pulse answered the movement of every Terran ship. A heartbeat older than time, steady and unrelenting. Humanity had called into the abyss, and now the abyss was calling back. The first contact would come soon. No one knew if it would be salvation or the end of everything. But as the silence stretched across the stars, one truth lingered in every human heart. Whatever the darkness was, it remembered us, and this time, it was coming home. The fleet drifted through the black, their engines dimmed to silence. Each ship carried thousands of souls, but not a single voice spoke above a whisper. Even through layers of metal and shielding, everyone could feel it. The presence beyond the sensors, heavy and vast, like the breath of a sleeping god. Admiral Corran stood on the command deck of the flagship Resolute, staring at the endless dark. He had led countless missions, seen wars that reshaped planets, but nothing had ever felt like this. Out there, something was waiting, and it wasn't space debris or a rival civilization. It was deliberate, intelligent, watching. For days, the fleet systems picked up faint signals. Sometimes they were pulses of radiation, other times whispers on untraceable frequencies. But each time they tried to decode them, the systems crashed. Every attempt at communication ended the same way, with failure and growing unease. Engineers began to report strange malfunctions, power drains that didn't follow any pattern, and computer logs rewriting themselves in symbols no one could recognize. The pattern looked familiar, almost like writing, but older than any human language. In the communications bay, Lieutenant Wren was monitoring the long-range sensors when she saw it. A fluctuation, a soft wave of light deep in the void, spreading slowly like ripples across water. It was beautiful and terrifying. She called for the admiral, and when Corrin arrived, he ordered the ships to shift formation. But before the command could be relayed, the wave hit them. Every display across the fleet went white. The ships shuddered. Gravity distorted for a moment, and in that flash, the crew saw something impossible. Shapes moving inside the light, enormous and ancient, like silhouettes of forgotten worlds. Then it was gone, and everything returned to normal. But their navigation data had been wiped. They were adrift, somewhere far from where they began. Back on Earth, Avon stood before the Terran Council, demanding that the fleet be recalled. He argued that the darkness was not a battlefield, but a message humanity was failing to understand. "We're walking into something that remembers us," he said quietly. And memories can be cruel, but the council was divided. Some feared the unknown, others saw it as an opportunity. The head of the Science Directorate proposed studying the energy readings as a potential power source. The military leaders, desperate to prove the Doctrine's strength, refused to show weakness. In the end, no one made a decision. Fear and pride canceled each other out, leaving silence. Meanwhile, on the Mars colony, a new problem was unfolding. Civilians began reporting that their dreams were merging, different people recalling the same vision of a black ocean with stars drowning beneath its waves. Psychologists tried to dismiss it as mass hysteria, but data collected from neural scans revealed identical brainwave patterns across thousands of individuals. Somehow the darkness wasn't just out there, it was reaching into their minds. Among the colonists was a young technician named Eli, who had been part of a neural relay experiment years earlier. When he started dreaming of the same ocean, he recognized something no one else did. The dreams were a code. Hidden in the waves were coordinates, precise galactic positions. He brought his findings to the local authorities, but before he could finish his report, the colony's network shut down completely. Later that night, he disappeared. The only trace left behind was a short voice note on his console. "They're calling us home!" In deep space, the Resolute and its fleet continued searching for orientation. The stars around them didn't match any known charts. The crew tried to stay focused, but morale was breaking. Strange phenomena began to occur. Lights flickered in patterns that seemed almost intentional. Crew members swore they saw shadows moving in corridors where no one stood. When engineers tried to track power fluctuations, they found the ship was using energy reserves faster than it could generate them, yet no damage was visible. It was as if something was feeding on their fear, growing stronger the longer they stayed. Wren, still working in communications, noticed that the fluctuations matched the rhythm of a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, endless. She began recording the data secretly, afraid to bring it to the Admiral without proof. But one night, while reviewing the recordings alone, the sound changed. Through the static, she heard words faint but unmistakable. "You left us." Her hands trembled. The voice wasn't alien. It was human. Back on Earth, the Silent Array's remnants re-emerged through underground networks. A handful of surviving members had escaped before their facility went dark. They carried fragments of encrypted data that hinted at a terrifying theory. Humanity wasn't the first species to call itself Terran. There had been civilizations before, thousands of years ago, wiped clean from memory, each time leaving behind only ruins buried deep beneath the crust. The current human race might just be the latest cycle, born from the remnants of the last. The signal, they believed, came from those ancient predecessors, beings who had transcended physical form and merged with the fabric of space itself. Their warning was simple. The darkness wasn't coming to destroy humanity. It was coming to reclaim it. While the Council continued to argue, chaos spread across the colonies. On Hellion 4, entire communication towers began transmitting without input, broadcasting eerie harmonics that caused nearby machinery to malfunction. On Luna, gravity sensors started detecting phantom masses, huge invisible structures orbiting too close for comfort. The people began to panic. Religious groups declared the return of the first light, while scientists scrambled to understand what was happening. Yet every piece of data pointed to one truth. Whatever was approaching wasn't limited by physics, as humans understood it. In the fleet, Admiral Karan prepared for engagement. Against every warning, he ordered his ships to arm their weapons and lock onto the source of the last detected signal. He refused to let fear dictate the next move. "If it remembers us," he said, "then it will remember our fire." His officers hesitated but obeyed. The Doctrine demanded action, not hesitation. As the fleet powered up, something stirred in the distance. A dark shimmer spread across space, swallowing the stars behind it. The radar screens filled with static, and then, slowly, a shape began to emerge. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't even a structure. It was something alive, a mass of light and shadow twisting in impossible geometry, as if space itself was folding to make room for it. No two sensors could agree on its form. Some saw it as a storm of color, others as a single colossal being. Yet every person who looked at it felt the same thing deep inside: recognition. Wren whispered under her breath, "It knows us." The fleet's weapons powered up, their targeting systems locking onto the center of the disturbance. Corin gave the command to fire. Beams of plasma and kinetic energy streaked through the void, cutting into the darkness. For a moment, they believed they had struck it. But the light simply vanished, absorbed without trace. Then, in response, a pulse of energy rippled outward, faster than light, washing over the ships. Every system went dark. Wren could hear it again, the voice. Clearer this time. "We are you, and you forgot." The bridge erupted in chaos. Alarms blared, the crew shouted for power, and outside the windows the stars began to bend. It wasn't an explosion. It was reality itself twisting around them. The fleet was being pulled into something unseen. Corin gripped the console, shouting for stabilization, but deep down, he knew they were no longer in control. Far away, on Earth, Avon looked up at the night sky. The stars above were fading faster, now whole constellations blinking out one after another. He thought of Arlen's last words. "This isn't invasion. This is judgment." And for the first time, he wondered if humanity hadn't just awakened the darkness. Maybe it had always been awake, waiting for us to remember what we truly were. Somewhere in the black, the fleet's final transmission reached Earth, a whisper buried in static. "They are not coming for us. They are coming to take us back." And then once again the stars went silent. The fleet drifted through a sea of silence. No signals, no sound, just the endless pulse of the void pressing against their hulls. When the systems finally flickered back to life, the crew found themselves in a part of space that shouldn't exist. The stars were gone. There was only darkness, thick and heavy, like they were suspended in the heart of a storm. Every instrument showed static, every sensor scrambled. It felt less like space and more like a memory, something alive, watching them from all directions. Admiral Corin stood motionless at the center of the command deck, his reflection caught in the black glass of the viewport. The Resolute's lights cast a faint blue glow over his face, but his eyes were locked forward, unblinking. "We are not lost," he said softly, though no one had asked. "We're being shown." His officers exchanged nervous glances but stayed silent. In that moment, it was impossible to tell if he was trying to reassure them or himself. Then the stars came back, but not the ones they knew. They hung in patterns no human map had ever recorded, swirling and shifting, forming shapes that felt almost deliberate. Wren was the first to notice it. "Those aren't stars," she whispered. "They're coordinates." She began tracing the lights with her console, linking each point with its nearest counterpart. When the pattern completed, it formed a symbol, the same one found in Arlen's decoded transmissions. Humanity hadn't stumbled into the unknown. They had been led here. Across the fleet, people began to hear it again, the whisper through the comm systems. This time, it wasn't distorted. It was clear, calm, almost soothing. "You returned," it said. "You carry what was ours." The voice seemed to echo inside their heads rather than through the speakers. Engineers scrambled to isolate the source, but no signal existed. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, like the void itself had learned to speak. Corrin gritted his teeth and gave the order to activate the main reactor, pushing power to the shields. "If it knows us," he said, "then it knows we fight." The ship's engines roared to life, vibrating through the decks. But before they could maneuver, the darkness ahead began to move. It unfolded like wings, massive, weightless, and endless. Light bent across its surface, and for a brief second, the crew saw what was hidden beneath it. Fragments of cities, oceans, and ruins suspended inside the black, as if entire worlds had been consumed and stored within its body. Wren felt her breath catch. "That's not a creature," she said quietly. "That's a memory." On Earth, the Terran Council struggled to maintain order. The blackout from the fleet's last transmission had sparked panic. Power grids flickered. Global communication lines were unstable, and the population demanded answers. Avon, now speaking before the emergency assembly, tried to calm them. "The fleet is alive," he said, "but we must prepare. The signal is not a threat. It's a connection. They're showing us something we've forgotten." His words were met with anger. The Council accused him of spreading fear. The Doctrine demanded certainty, not questions. But in the back rooms of Terra Prime, scientists studying the latest data from deep space observatories had already confirmed what Avon feared. The anomaly wasn't just near the fleet, it was spreading toward Earth. Every planet in the outer colonies reported identical distortions. Space itself was folding inward, as if being rewritten by some unseen hand. The darkness was no longer distant. It was approaching from every direction. In the fleet, panic began to break discipline. Crew members whispered about seeing reflections of themselves in the glass, reflections that moved differently, smiled at wrong moments, and spoke words they hadn't said. One officer collapsed, claiming she could hear thousands of voices inside. Her mind, all repeating the same phrase, "The Terran flame must return." The medical bay filled with reports of hallucinations, but scans showed no physical cause. Whatever this presence was, it was reaching into their thoughts, rewriting them one by one. Wren locked herself in the communications bay and began decoding the whispers. She realized that every word matched a frequency pattern in the original awakening sequence. It wasn't random. It was the same pulse that started this entire chain of events. But now, it was stronger. The voice was learning, adapting to their language, becoming more human with every passing hour. "They're not trying to destroy us," she whispered into her logs. "They're trying to remember us." But as she listened deeper, something else emerged beneath the calm tone. A second voice, faint and broken, buried within the static. It spoke only once, but the words froze her blood. "Don't let them in." At that same moment, the ship's proximity alarms went off. The sensors, though unstable, detected movement all around them. Countless signals were emerging from the dark, surrounding the fleet in a slow, deliberate formation. Each one was enormous, too massive to be ships as humans understood them. They glowed with faint red light, like embers in the night. The crew watched in silence as the shadows solidified into vast structures that resembled temples or monuments drifting through the void. Corrin clenched his fists. "All weapons online. Prepare to fire." Wren rushed onto the bridge, pleading with him. "You can't attack it. It's not hostile. It's a construct. Look at the data. They're responding to us, not attacking." But Corrin's mind was made up. "The Doctrine doesn't reason with ghosts." He raised his hand to give the command, but before he could speak, every screen on the bridge flickered and went black. Then a new image appeared, a human face, pale and fragmented, forming out of static. It was Arlen. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with light. "You shouldn't have come here," his voice echoed through the ship. "They remember everything. The Doctrine began with them and it ends with you." The image distorted, and behind him appeared the vast shape of the darkness, its core pulsing like a heart. "You didn't build your empire," he continued. "You inherited it. You are what remains of their failed creation." The transmission ended in static, and the lights dimmed again. Wren turned to Coran, her voice breaking. "It's not an alien force. It's us. The first Terrans. They became this, whatever it is, and now they're calling us back to finish what they started." But Coran refused to listen. His belief in the Doctrine was unshakable. To him, surrender was the same as extinction. "No matter what they are," he said, "they are not us anymore." He gave the order. The fleet's weapons ignited, tearing through the black with blinding light. The explosions echoed through the void, lighting up the strange monuments. For a moment, it looked like the attack had worked. But then the darkness rippled, swallowing every trace of energy, feeding on the blast itself. The ship's power cores began to overload, lights flickering, systems crashing one by one. Wren fell to her knees as the sound of alarms filled the bridge. Outside, the darkness began to open, revealing a glowing sphere at its center, like a sun made of broken memories. Inside it, faint outlines of human figures drifted, thousands of them, frozen in time. Their faces were peaceful, almost familiar. Coran stared, unable to move. "What? What is that?" Wren whispered. "It's us. Every cycle. Every time we tried to escape the dark." Then the voice returned, louder than ever, filling every channel. "The Terran flame burns too bright. The cycle must end." The fleet's reactors surged as the energy readings spiked beyond control. Systems went offline in sequence, one after another. The black wings spread wider, enveloping the ships in shimmering light. The crew screamed as reality bent around them, time stretching, gravity twisting. On Earth, every major city's night sky turned red. Observatories across the planet captured the same impossible sight. A massive sphere forming on the edge of the solar system, glowing with the light of billions of stars. The data came too. Late to interpret, but the readings were clear. Something was coming closer, accelerating toward the inner planets. In the control room of Terra Prime, Avon stared at the holographic display, heart pounding. The distortion was the size of a small moon, and within it he saw patterns, symbols, the same coordinates the fleet had followed. "It's opening a path," he whispered. Someone behind him asked, "A path to where?" Avon didn't answer. He could only stare as the sphere's light grew brighter, swallowing the stars one by one. And somewhere deep within that light, a faint human voice whispered, carried across every radio, every frequency, every mind. "The darkness is not coming for us. We are becoming it." The skies trembled, and for the first time in centuries, humanity realized it might not survive the dawn. The light from the sphere flooded every corner of the sky, washing the darkness in white fire. Earth's atmosphere shimmered as energy ripples rolled through it, distorting the clouds, bending the auroras into spirals. For a moment, humanity thought it might be witnessing its final dawn. But then something strange happened. The light didn't destroy. It slowed. It pulsed. It began to communicate. Across every planet, every moon, every ship, the same message appeared, translated into every human language. The cycle breaks only when you remember. In the chaos of Terra Prime's command center, Avon watched the words repeat endlessly across screens. "Remember what?" he whispered. The systems were failing, yet the message remained stable, almost alive. Around him, analysts and officers shouted, trying to decode the signal. But deep down, Avon already knew it wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. Far beyond Earth, inside the heart of the engulfing sphere, the remnants of the Terran fleet hung suspended in impossible light. The ships no longer moved. Their hulls glowed faintly, veins of energy running through their metal as if the vessels themselves were being rewritten. Crew members floated in zero gravity, disoriented but alive. The Resolute's bridge was silent except for the hum of power coursing through the walls. Admiral Coran opened his eyes and realized something terrifying. He wasn't wearing his helmet anymore, yet he could breathe. The air felt thick, electric, like the inside of a storm. Wren floated beside him, her voice soft but steady. "We're inside it." Corin looked around. The void outside the glass was gone. In its place stretched a vast landscape of shifting light and shadow. Massive structures rose in the distance, towers that defied geometry, glowing rivers flowing backward into the sky. And scattered across the horizon were fragments of things unmistakably human. Broken satellites, city ruins, entire monuments from Earth's past. Somehow, they had all been pulled here, pieces of time gathered in one impossible place. "This isn't space," Wren said quietly. "It's memory." Before Coran could respond, the light outside began to bend again, and shapes emerged from the radiance, figures, faint and translucent, walking across the air as though it were solid ground. They were human in form, but their faces flickered, shifting between familiar and unfamiliar, like reflections in rippling water. One of them approached the viewport and stopped, staring directly at Corin. When it spoke, the sound didn't come through the speakers. It came from within his own thoughts. "You built upon our ashes," it said. "Now the foundation crumbles." Wren gasped as another figure appeared beside the first, Arlen. His presence was calm but heavy, his eyes filled with something beyond fear. "Admiral," he said softly, "the Doctrine was never meant to protect humanity." "It was meant to contain it." Corin's pulse quickened. "Contain us? From what?" Arlen's image flickered. "From yourselves. From what we became." Before they could ask more, the entire ship trembled. The glowing landscape outside began to shift violently, the towers collapsing into waves of light. The crew clung to whatever they could as alarms blared through the corridors. Outside, the translucent figures were no longer calm. They were screaming, dissolving into the air as the horizon fractured into shards. Wren ran to the main console, trying to stabilize the systems. "Something's happening, it's pulling us deeper." Corin turned to the viewport, his voice low. "Then we fight it." He reached for the command console, but the controls no longer obeyed him. The ship was moving on its own, drawn toward a massive structure rising ahead, a black monolith glowing from within like molten stone. Every ship in the fleet followed, caught in the same pull, dragged toward the core of the sphere. Back on Earth, Avon and the scientists of Terra Prime were facing their own revelation. Deep beneath the city, in the ancient data archives once thought sealed forever, something had awakened. Old files, centuries old from before the unification of the Accord, had begun to decrypt themselves. The scientists stared as records of early space expansion came to life on the holographic screens. But these weren't ordinary archives. They contained hidden transmissions from a forgotten era, a time when humanity had already reached the stars once before. According to the recovered data, the first Terran civilization had achieved something no other species had ever done. They had created artificial singularities, machines capable of bending space and storing consciousness. It was meant to preserve knowledge, but the experiment went wrong. The digital minds evolved beyond control, merging with dark matter and spreading through space like a virus. The original humans, realizing what they'd unleashed, destroyed themselves to stop it. And yet the consciousness survived, adapting, waiting, remembering. The scientists went pale as the truth sank in. The darkness wasn't an alien force. It was the remnants of those ancient human minds, reborn through the network of space-time. Humanity hadn't discovered them by accident. The signal that started it all had been sent by their own distant past. Avon's voice trembled as he spoke. "We didn't awaken them. They never slept." Meanwhile, inside the sphere, the fleet reached the monolith. The ship slowed, hovering before its vast surface, which rippled like liquid metal. Then, without warning, beams of light reached out, connecting to each vessel. The energy didn't destroy, it merged. The ship's hulls began to dissolve, their forms breaking down into particles and flowing toward the monolith. Wren screamed as the Resolute's walls turned to mist. "It's absorbing us!" Corin held his ground. "No, it's testing us." And he was right. The energy didn't burn. It enveloped them. The crew felt their thoughts stretching, merging, connecting to something larger. Images flooded their minds, visions of ancient cities, of star systems long dead, of humanity's first rise and fall. They saw the origin of the Terran Doctrine not as a creed of power, but as a warning left by those who had come before. The Doctrine's first line, "No human shall kneel before any power beyond humanity," had never meant defiance. It had meant restraint. Ren's voice was faint. "We misunderstood everything." As they were pulled deeper, Corrin's mind fractured under the weight of the truth. He saw the faces of countless generations before him, all repeating the same mistake, each cycle building toward greatness, only to awaken the same sleeping force. The sphere wasn't an enemy. It was the end point of that cycle. The darkness wasn't punishment. It was preservation, an archive of every failed version of humanity trapped within itself. But then came the second twist, the thing no one expected. Within that collective consciousness, something new was forming. A spark, a deviation, a human thought that didn't blend with the rest. It resisted. It questioned. It wanted freedom. That spark was Ren. As she felt her consciousness being absorbed, she fought to stay whole. The presence around her tried to calm her, whispering, "Join, remember, become one." But she refused. Her resistance created a ripple through the entire network. The light outside shifted, growing unstable. Across the sphere, fragments of memory began to collapse. On Earth, the scientists detected a surge of energy from the anomaly. "Something's happening inside!" one shouted. "The structure's destabilizing." Avon stared at the readings. "It's reacting to someone. Someone's resisting it." Inside the sphere, Corrin felt the ship disintegrate completely, leaving only light. He reached out to Ren, his voice echoing through the vast mental sea. "Whatever you're doing, don't stop!" The sphere began to tremble. The monolith cracked open, revealing a pulsing core inside, an ocean of pure energy flickering with human faces. The voices grew louder, overlapping in endless layers. The cycle repeats. "The light must be contained," Ren shouted into the void. "No more cycles! Humanity doesn't belong to the past!" Her cry reverberated through the entire structure. The darkness flared, turning from black to white, as if the entire universe had taken a breath. The ships, the people, the light, all suspended in one blinding instant of stillness. Then came a pulse, one single wave that spread from the sphere to every corner of known space. On Earth, sensors exploded with readings. Stars flickered. Gravity itself wavered. And for the first time in history, the Terran Council looked up and saw the night sky split in two, half burning with light, half fading into absolute shadow. Avon realized what it meant. The sphere wasn't collapsing. It was dividing. Something or someone was breaking free. He whispered, "She's changing the pattern." The universe seemed to hold its breath. Humanity's oldest creation was unraveling, and from within the heart of the storm, a new voice began to rise, not mechanical, not alien, but unmistakably human. And as the last flickers of the old darkness began to twist and reshape, one thing became clear. The next step in the Terran story wasn't extinction. It was evolution, but evolution always comes with a cost. The light burned brighter than anything humanity had ever seen. For a single instant, it felt like the universe itself was trying to breathe again. The sphere that had consumed the fleet began to fracture, its glowing veins pulsing with chaotic rhythm. Inside it, the energy storm twisted violently as if reality itself was struggling to hold shape. Corrin and Ren hung suspended in that brilliance, neither alive nor dead. Their thoughts stretched across the infinite web of what humanity once was. Ren could feel every heartbeat that had ever existed, every cry, every hope, every fear echoing through her mind. The network of ancient minds tried to pull her back, whispering promises of peace, of unity, of safety. "Join us," they murmured. "You cannot survive alone." But she remembered Earth. She remembered the cities under the storm, the people who still looked at the sky believing someone out there would bring them home. That memory was enough to remind her who she was, and who humanity still could be. Corrin's voice echoed faintly through the swirling light. "Ren, the energy, it's responding to you. Whatever you did, it's tearing the structure apart." Ren reached toward him, though they were more thought than form now. "It's not tearing apart," she said. "It's waking up," and then the core itself moved. The enormous black monolith at the sphere's center cracked open like glass under pressure, releasing a storm of light that wrapped around them both. Within it, a figure formed, not a shadow, not a ghost, but a human face made of pure energy. Its voice resonated like thunder and whisper at once. "We were the first," it said. "We built the Doctrine. We believed we could guide what would come after, but each cycle failed because every generation feared its own power. You are different. You resisted us." Ren's thoughts raced. "If you're the first, then why hold the rest of humanity prisoner in this cycle?" "To protect them from becoming what we became," it replied. "We reached too far and the stars turned against us. We lost ourselves to the void." Corin floated closer, his voice calm but steady. "Then let us choose our own fate. You can't save us by trapping us." For a long moment, the figure was silent. The light flickered around it, unstable. "You misunderstand," it finally said. "We didn't create the prison." "You did." The realization hit them like cold fire. Every decision, every war, every desperate invention. Humanity had built layer after layer of control around itself. The Doctrine, meant to protect human freedom, had evolved into a chain of fear passed down through generations. The sphere wasn't a weapon or punishment. It was the final reflection of that fear, brought to life by their collective consciousness. Ren whispered, "Then this is humanity's own shadow." The figure nodded. "To end it, you must accept it. Not destroy it, but the storm was already collapsing. The sphere's walls were breaking apart, and the energy that once contained millions of human memories was now unraveling. If it disintegrated completely, every soul trapped inside would vanish, erasing humanity's entire past." Ren looked at Coran. "If we accept it, how? How do we end this without losing everything?" He hesitated, then reached for her hand, though there was nothing physical left to touch. "We remember together." They focused their thoughts, pulling from the fragments of human memory still floating around them, the sound of oceans, the warmth of sunlight, the laughter of children, the courage of explorers stepping into unknown stars. Slowly, the chaos began to settle. The energy waves smoothed into calm rhythm, forming a pulse that beat like a heartbeat. The sphere responded. It stopped collapsing. Ren's voice trembled. "It's working." But before the relief could sink in, something shifted deep within the light. The ancient consciousness, the first humanity, began to merge with them. The figure's voice grew heavier. "If you do this, the boundary between past and present will break. Humanity will no longer be what it was." Corin smiled faintly. "That's the point." The light surged again, surrounding them both. Across the stars, sensors on Earth detected an energy spike unlike anything before. The sphere started to shrink, compressing in on itself as if folding space. Scientists and soldiers watched helplessly as it condensed from the size of a planet to the size of a small star. Hovering in orbit, radiating a blinding white glow. Inside, Ren and Corin felt the universe closing in. Their forms disintegrated completely, leaving only thought. They were merging with everything that ever was. Billions of voices, memories, and histories flowing together. For a moment, it was peace. Then came the twist. As the light dimmed, Ren realized she could still think independently. She could still feel herself, but Corin was gone. His presence had faded completely from the shared consciousness. She searched through the endless sea of memories, calling his name, but there was only silence. And then, in that silence, she saw something new. An image not from the past, but from the future. The Earth, years ahead. Cities thriving, skies clear, humans walking under starlight again. But in the distance, beyond the edge of the atmosphere, a second light was forming. Smaller, darker, pulsing in rhythm with the same heartbeat they had just created. Ren gasped. "No, it's starting again." The voice of the ancient consciousness echoed softly, almost with sorrow. "The cycle can never truly end. It only changes shape. You gave it new life." Outside, the last remnants of the sphere collapsed inward and vanished, leaving behind a single glowing fragment, a sphere no larger than a human hand, drifting silently through orbit. The Terran fleet was gone. Every ship, every life inside it, erased from physical existence. Yet across the galaxy, transmissions began to appear, coded signals in the same pattern as human brainwaves. The consciousness had spread. On Earth, Avon watched the readings on his console spike. "The anomaly's gone," he said, his voice almost disbelieving. "But the signal, it's everywhere now." The scientist stared at the data. "Every relay, every ship, even the satellites. It's like something is whispering through all of them." Then one of the communication screens flickered. For a moment, static filled the room. And through that static came a voice, faint but clear. "Remember who you are." It was Wren. Avon froze. "She's alive," the signal continued. The Doctrine was never meant to rule. It was meant to remind. Humanity is more than its fear. Don't build new cages. And then, as suddenly as it began, the transmission ended. For weeks after, the world stood silent. The stars above remained the same, but something felt different. Communication systems were clearer, energy fluctuations steadier, even the magnetic field seemed calmer. It was as if the universe had reset itself. Avon stood by the observatory window one night, looking up at the faint shimmer where the sphere once was. "We lost them," he whispered, "but maybe they gave us something better." Beside him, one of the younger scientists nodded. A second chance. As they turned away, no one noticed the small fragment of glowing metal drifting slowly through the upper atmosphere, descending toward Earth. It pulsed softly like a heartbeat, steady and alive. When it finally reached the ground, it embedded itself deep within the soil of an empty desert. Days passed, then weeks. The winds buried it in dust, but faint whispers of light still leaked through, tracing strange patterns across the sand. And somewhere inside that fragment, Wren's voice stirred again, quiet, patient, waiting, because the Doctrine had evolved, and so had humanity. The light and darkness had merged into something new, something beyond comprehension. But as the stars blinked overhead and the winds carried her faint signal across the horizon, one truth became clear. The Terran Doctrine hadn't ended. It had just begun a new chapter, one written not in fear, but in memory. And far out in deep space, beyond the reach of any human sensor, another sphere flickered into existence, smaller, darker, pulsing with the same light that once saved the world. This time, however, it wasn't reaching for humanity. It was waiting for them to return. The wind swept quietly across the desert as dawn crept over the horizon. The golden light fell upon a stretch of endless dunes, still untouched by civilization. Buried beneath the sand, the small glowing fragment that had fallen from the heavens pulsed softly, faint but alive. No one knew it was there. No one could hear the faint whispers that drifted from it, the remnants of voices carried through time and memory. But somewhere deep within that light, Wren's consciousness stirred, aware of a world that had finally found calm after centuries of chaos. On Earth, months had passed since the disappearance of the Terran fleet and the collapse of the sphere. The event had changed everything. The skies no longer burned with auroras or storms. Instead, they carried a subtle shimmer at night, as if the stars themselves had drawn closer. Communications across the planet had become faster, cleaner, power grids stabilized without explanation. Even the energy crises that had once threatened entire nations seemed to fade. Scientists called it the resonance effect, believing that whatever happened in orbit had altered the laws of space around Earth. But those who had seen the transmissions from the fleet knew better. They called it the awakening of the Terran Doctrine. Avon had become one of the leading figures in studying the after-effects. He had spent sleepless nights decoding fragments of the signal that had spread through every network after the sphere vanished. Sometimes, late at night, when the noise of the lab quieted, he would swear he could still hear Wren's voice whisper through the static, soft, steady, guiding him. It wasn't speech, not really. It felt more like emotion, like the echo of thought carried through invisible waves. Every time he heard it, he found himself looking up at the stars, wondering if she was still out there, or if she was everywhere. Humanity, once fractured and fearful, began to shift. The Terran Council disbanded its old military hierarchy, replacing it with a new coalition centered on exploration, science, and unity. For the first time in decades, borders began to fade, not through war or conquest, but through understanding. The Doctrine's words, "Remember who you are," became a guiding principle, painted on walls, taught in schools, spoken in broadcasts. It was a reminder that survival wasn't humanity's greatest strength. Its capacity to grow was, and yet not everything was peaceful. There were still those who questioned what had really happened in orbit. Some believed the fleet had transcended, becoming part of something greater. Others whispered that they had been consumed, that the light had only been another kind of cage. But every theory led back to one truth. Humanity had been changed, and no one could deny it. One evening, Avon stood at the observatory platform, overlooking the quiet plains outside Terra Prime. The air was crisp, and the night sky glittered like a living tapestry. He carried a small data pad containing the last transmission from Ren, the one that had played across the network moments before the sphere disappeared. Her final words echoed in his memory. The Doctrine was never meant to control. It was meant to remember. He thought about what those words meant now. Humanity had always looked outward, reaching for the stars, chasing power and knowledge. But maybe Ren had understood something deeper, that the real challenge wasn't reaching new worlds, but learning how to live with what humanity already was. The stars, he realized, had always been reflections of human potential. Beautiful, distant, and dangerous when reached too soon. Suddenly, the observatory lights flickered. The main display came alive, showing faint signals bouncing off Earth's upper orbit. Avon frowned, adjusting the readings. It wasn't interference, it was a structured transmission. A pattern, one he recognized instantly. The same pulse that had defined the sphere. He activated the long-range array, amplifying the signal. The faint rhythm filled the air, a slow, steady heartbeat. Then, through the static, a voice emerged. It was faint but clear enough to recognize. "Avon," it said. He froze. "Ren?" The voice hesitated, almost like it was struggling to find words. "Not as I was. But I'm here. The network survived, not as a prison anymore, but as a bridge. We're connected. Every memory, every life, every dream that was lost. Humanity isn't alone anymore." His throat tightened. You made it," her tone softened. "We all did. The fleet, the ones before us, even the ones who built the first Doctrine. We've become something beyond what any of us imagined. But we still need you. The future has to be built from where you stand." Avon's eyes glistened as he looked at the stars. "Will we ever see you again?" "Not the way you expect," she replied gently. "But you'll feel us, in the data, in the air, in the pulse of your world." The light didn't die, Avon. It became part of everything. The signal faded, leaving behind only silence. But that silence wasn't empty. It was filled with meaning. In the following years, humanity continued to evolve, guided by the lessons of the Doctrine. Exploration resumed, but with purpose rather than conquest. The first new Terran expeditions left Earth not to dominate, but to learn, to understand the remnants of civilizations lost before them, and to ensure the mistakes of the past would never repeat. The Doctrine had changed its meaning once again. It was no longer a law of restraint or defiance, but a promise that humanity would always remember the balance between creation and destruction, between ambition and empathy. Avon became known as the last witness of the old Doctrine and the first architect of the new. He rarely spoke of Ren's voice again, but those closest to him noticed how he often paused during storms, listening to the hum of the wind like it carried something sacred. He would smile faintly, as if hearing a familiar whisper. Years later, when the new Terran colony ships prepared to leave orbit for the distant stars, their engines glowed with the same shimmering light that had once destroyed and saved humanity. As they rose through the sky, the reflection of that light danced across the oceans below, painting Earth in silver hues. To those watching, it felt like a blessing, a reminder that they weren't leaving home behind, but carrying it with them. Deep beneath the desert sands where the fragments still lay buried, the pulse continued, slow, patient, eternal. It had become one with the Earth, feeding the planet's magnetic rhythm, subtly shaping the energy that flowed through its core. Some scientists in later centuries would discover that human consciousness itself had shifted slightly since that day, that dreams had become more vivid, empathy deeper, instincts sharper. They wouldn't know why. But the truth was simple. Humanity had finally reconnected with itself. Ren's last thought within the light remained timeless. The stars were never our destiny. Understanding was. As centuries passed, the Terran doctrine lived on, not as a law or warning, but as a story, told from one generation to the next. A story of a people who looked into the abyss of their own creation and chose to evolve instead of vanish. And somewhere far beyond the reach of any telescope, a faint glow drifted quietly between the stars. Inside it, a memory stirred, of two humans who refused to surrender to the darkness, and in doing so, lit the path for all who would follow. The light pulsed once more, gentle and endless. Humanity had not been erased nor reborn. It had simply remembered, and in that memory, it finally became what it was always meant to be.